Never a dull moment in the land of the New York Jets and their fans. We are here tonight to talk a little bit about the Athletic and the accusations levied by them about New York Jets owner Woody Johnson. I am Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio, JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Joined tonight by my good friend Chris Schubert, Dylan Terman, not able to take part this evening, but he will have some thoughts on all of the goings on in the world of the Jets when we're back next week. Chris, how are we doing?
Doing well, Glenn. You know what that means. That's a fine for Dylan on the ledger for the year. So we have to make sure we get that in here as the show starts. And you're right, never a dull moment. Plenty of stuff to get into. Rex Ryan openly campaigning like this is a primary to be the candidate for president of the United States, to try to be the next head coach of the New York Jets, and an athletic story that is still making waves multiple days later. So wherever you would like to start, I've kept all of my thoughts all week long for this moment, for this podcast. So we'll see what the next hour or so has in store for us all.
Well, I spoke last night on the Rex Ryan situation, and that's where I wanted to kick off tonight for you. Let you have your say.
Wow.
I don't know if you've got 5 seconds worth of thoughts or 5 minutes worth of thoughts, but the floor is yours to talk Rex Ryan and the Jets.
Yeah, I think I could give you both versions. I could give you the 5 second version or the 5 minute, 50-minute version, depends on which one you're looking for. I think it comes from a good place, right? I think this is the rare multiple things can be true at the same time, although I don't know how rare it is for us on this show. I think we do it 2 or 3 times a show, but it's the multiple things can be true. I can appreciate Rex Ryan's willingness to want to be the New York Jets head coach, his passion for wanting to be the Jets head coach, because the New York Jets very rarely have somebody that is that passionate about the dumpster fire that they are, right? Rex Ryan was here. Rex Ryan went through the ups and downs of being the New York Jet head coach, left, went to coach someplace else, and yet still is asking for more. Now, maybe it's because he wants a head coaching job and he feels like this is his only path, but also his dad coached here, he cares, right? So I can appreciate that part of it. I can also say, I don't really love the way he's going about it, right? If he wants to be a legitimate candidate the way everybody else is a legitimate candidate, call Woody, say you're interested. If Woody and company want to bring you in for an interview when they hire the next general manager, then so be it, right? I think that's fine. The way he's openly kind of campaigning for it, I can understand why it rubs some people the wrong way. So I get it. I understand why Rex is doing it. I can appreciate the passion that he has for the team. I don't think that's a bad thing. There's also part of me that doesn't like the way he's going about it. At the end of the day, I think this would be a terrible mistake for the New York Jets. I do not think Rex Ryan, who's been out of the NFL for as long as he has been out of the NFL for, is the right person to lead this team through this transitional period. Because if you are hiring Rex Ryan, that is telling your fan base you think this roster is ready to win now. Everybody on this podcast who listens on a regular basis knows how I feel about this current core, knows where I feel the direction of this team is going to go. I don't think they can win next year. I don't think they can win next year with Aaron Rodgers. I don't think they can win next year with Tyrod Taylor. I don't think they can win next year if they bring in a rookie quarterback. The time to talk about winning for the New York Jets is 2026. That is when winning is on the table for this team. So I want to coach general manager with that type of vision in place, getting this team ready for 2026. So would I be surprised if Rex Ryan is hired? No. Do I think Rex Ryan is going to be hired? No. Would Rex Ryan being hired the worst thing the Jets have done in the last 10 years? Absolutely not. Would it get me to leave the fan base? I don't know. Right now, the answer is no, but let's see how I feel when it happens. And I know this probably makes me a little unpopular. I'm out on the Rex Ryan thing. I get it. I understand it from Rex's perspective. I can appreciate the passion. I can appreciate how much he wants to try to turn this team around. But there are much better options that I think can help both the short and long-term visions for this team. So thanks, Rex. Appreciate the energy, but no thanks. I'd like to go in a different direction.
Yeah, even myself, and I've said, before, I was a huge Rex guy, loved him. Look, and as I said last night, more postseason success with Rex than any other coach in my lifetime, than any coach in team history. If we're talking about just postseason wins, right? Nobody's won more than Rex has. But even having discussed it last night, thinking about it today, I just thought, there's no way it's going to happen. But then you think, what's the candidate list going to look like if you're Woody Johnson? You can say, I don't want Rex. But you know what, Woody? There might be a lot of candidates who don't want the Jets. So when all is said and done, when you rack and stack your candidates who are looking at you and saying, yes, I'm willing to come coach this football team. Where does Rex rank among those guys?
That's fair. And I don't disagree with that premise. But I think people have to understand how this web is going to weave itself throughout the offseason. Now, let's make something very clear because we're about to do it for the remainder of the show. Woody Johnson can do whatever he wants to do. Woody Johnson can make whatever decision he wants to make. But my feeling is they're going to hire the GM first, and then they're going to hire the head coach. They're going to go in the order that you're supposed to do this process in. So if that's the case, then before they hire the general manager, Woody Johnson and whatever advisory board he has of people still left in that building or outside of the building that are advising him on what to do, the first decision they have to make is, do they want Aaron Rodgers on this team in 2025? The only way Rex Ryan is the head coach of the Jets in 2025 is if the answer to that question is yes. The only way we get to Rex Ryan, 2025 New York Jets head coach, is if the Jets decide to give it one more year with Aaron Rodgers. So in order for us to get to that point, the Jets have to make the decision that they want to run it back with Aaron. They then have to hire a general manager who is on board with that process. And then the general manager has to go through all of the coaching candidates, however big that list is, however small that list is, that fit that idea of wanting to have Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback for one season. And Rex will be among that group, and then pick Rex Ryan. There are a lot of layers to get to Rex Ryan, 2025 New York Jets head coach. And so that's where I think this falls flat, because I do not think Rodgers is the quarterback in 2025.
And we've seen that from some beat writers, national, local. A lot of people seem to be saying this is going to be a full reset. They are going to want new head coach, new GM, new quarterback. And Rodgers, I think, even if they want Rodgers back, I don't know that he's going to want to learn a new offense. Everybody knows this, and people have said it over the last 48 hours that he came here because of the familiarity. Nate Hackett, I know the offense. I can walk in day one. I know every play in the playbook. Do you want to you would not only be asking Aaron Rodgers to learn a new offense, but you would probably be asking him to learn a new offense to play in for one season. That's a lot of work to put in to learn an entire playbook if you're only going to play for a year. And I think another factor is going to be how the season closes out. They close out with 4 or 5 losses in a row and new off, that. I don't know. I don't see it happening. And like I said, I love Rex. He genuinely, and I said this yesterday, and other people have said it in the chat. Whatever you think of him, he's one of the rare, really rare coaching candidates that truly wants to be here. Other people are willing to be here because, as everyone says, it's only 32 of these jobs, right? Somebody's going to take it, but you're not going to find somebody who wants it more than Rex does, that's one of those things, Chris. Honestly, it's nice, but it can't move the needle for you. You can't be like, well, we were on the bubble with this guy, but it makes us feel nice that he likes it here, so we'll hire him like that. It's a nice nostalgia, whatever you want to call it, connection with the fans. But it's not going to happen. But the question becomes, who is going to come work for Woody Johnson, and why is that a big question, Chris? Why would anyone not want to work for Woody Johnson? Well, as we know, Woody Johnson, upon Joe Douglas being let go, a story broke from The Athletic with lots and lots of nuggets of information that claim to be, some of Woody Johnson's meddling. Some of it has been reported by other outlets and sort of corroborated. Dylan, obviously, like I said, not here tonight. He and I spoke a little bit about this off the air. He's skeptical with some of it. He says he thinks probably 35 to 40% of what's being said is probably true. My thing is, if 5% of it were true, it's a bad look. You, Chris, I'm guessing based on history, the last time The Athletic had a bombshell report, you kind of said, look, I do journalism, and you can't just make this much. You can't, not supposed to make anything up. I'm not going to sit here and say I don't think anyone ever does, but I don't think someone's going to go out and make up like 15 things about an owner. So where are you on this particular bombshell report from The Athletic that gives us a look behind the curtain of the circus at One Jets Drive?
Well, it depends on which layer you want to take first, right? I think overall, I'm going to go back to my prior statement that you mentioned when it comes to this type of stuff. This doesn't appear out of thin air, right? The reporters don't make this up. Diana Rossini is a very well-respected reporter. Zach Rosenblatt is a well-respected beat reporter that has a ton of connections inside the building. The only thing this story is missing is on the byline where it says Zach Rosenblatt and Diana Rossini. It doesn't also say Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. That's the thing everybody's looking for, because this is a puff piece. It does have a slant to it. The source for the information, now this is me guessing. I haven't talked to Diana. I haven't talked to Zach. I don't know. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that all of a sudden we're getting insight into meetings about what Woody Johnson said, and all of a sudden these things come out after the GM and the coach were fired, and we know those two guys were in the room. Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know where this stuff is coming from. So yeah, they're trying to provide themselves some cover, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean it's not true. So I don't know. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the meeting where Woody wanted to bench Rodgers and how people, for whatever reason, can't fathom that this is accurate?
Because let's actually, even having just said we'd go over the list, let's start with, because this is something I've seen from a lot of fans. Do you think it's right? I don't know, morally right. Like I put myself, assuming this is from Joe Douglas, I put myself in his shoes. And let's not forget that initial report from The Athletic. And this isn't, there's a lot of revisionist history here. But when that report broke, one of the claims in that report was that Joe Douglas had lost his power to Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers was, I want Randall Cobb, I want Billy Turner, I want my friend Tim Boyle, he's been my backup before, I want Alan Lazard, and this list that Joe Douglas had to go out and get all the things done that Aaron Rodgers wanted. That's not to say there were no moves Joe Douglas could make individually, but he was basically, making moves, using 5-6 roster spots and a lot of cap space on guys Aaron Rodgers wanted. And then fast forward to this year, where there are apparently more moves that are being foisted on Joe Douglas. Go get Mike Williams. Go get this. Go do that. You can't get this guy. Don't get that guy. You can't. Like, if I'm Joe Douglas and I'm doing all that, and I mean, listen, I think the answer Douglas gave weeks ago when asked about Woody, said, I serve with the pleasure of the owner. That was a way of saying, I'm just here to do what they're telling me, because this isn't my show anymore. So if I'm Joe, and the not so much the fan perception, but if around the league, the conversation has become, look at all these terrible moves Joe Douglas has made. Is he supposed to just eat that and not leak the info and be like, yo, here's what really was going on? Even if there's a slant, like, I would, when you're, again, we always talk about how hard it is to get these jobs.
Right.
You expect a guy to just sit there and not open up and make it clear, like, look, I made, and he said it, that he said, look, I made some mistakes. There are things I wish I would have done differently. But if there are, a bevy of moves that are, eating up cap space, eating up roster spots that aren't working out, I don't know. I don't have a problem with Joe Douglas. I think it's human nature to defend yourself. Mike Maccagnan, think back, right? Mike Maccagnan was terrible. People, I've seen a few people say Douglas is the only guy ever to do this. I'm on a couple of, WhatsApp groups with some other Jets fans, and they were like, why is Joe D the only guy? Think back to late the Maccagnan era. While he still had the job, but it was clear he was going to go, there were a lot of reports that started leaking out about the mistakes Todd Bowles had made. Like, where do you think that was coming from? When it became in the public, it was like Bowles versus Maccagnan, who's the bigger screw up? And all of a sudden, all these Bowles hit pieces started coming out. That was coming from Maccagnan. So these guys do sometimes turn to reporters and say, I want my side out there. Sure. So do you think Joe Douglas is wrong, and Saleh, if we believe, and I wouldn't doubt it, that Saleh is giving some of the stuff? Are they wrong to do it? And then once you've given us your piece on that, go ahead and we'll kick it off with now. We don't need to address Saleh was fired without telling Joe D. We've already discussed that. Rich Sweeney reported it the day after it happened.
Right.
But the first one being Joe Douglas wanted to retain Bryce Huff, but Woody Johnson blocked that.
Yeah. So when it comes to whether or not it's the right thing for Joe to do, look, you're always going to want to position yourself as in the best way you possibly can because you want another job in the NFL. Here's my thought on it. As long as the stuff that Joe is telling these reporters is true, I don't have a problem with it. Now, if he's objectively making stuff up, like if Woody Johnson didn't veto the Jerry Jeudy trade and Joe is just blatantly making that up, and again, that's assuming Joe is the source for the story. Let's just make that evidently clear. But I kind of have the feeling reading it that this is very much a Joe Douglas slanted piece of like, hey, you want to get on Joe, but he really didn't have, full autonomy that you think a GM should have. I have no problem with him sharing this. Now, again, I will be the first person to say, that's great, Joe. You still were a part of the process to pick Zach Wilson number 2 overall. You got to own that. You have to own all of the bad. I can also give you the benefit of the doubt on all of this stuff that you're talking about, but there's some bad that you own as well, right?
Absolutely.
You still decided to go through with the Hassan Reddick trade, right? The story talks about that. You still decided to go through with it and thought it was a good idea. So there are things that you still have to own. So no, I don't have a problem with somebody being a source for this type of story as long as what they're saying is accurate, right? And unless they're completely making it up, zero problem with it. All right, let's try to do this in some type of order because there's so many things to unpack. You said Bryce Huff was the first thing that we'll get into. So let's start there. Although I really want to talk about them discussing benching Rodgers after the Bronco game because that's fascinating to me.
Start with that, and then we'll go to Bryce Huff.
I think there are some people that have pointed to that timeline as a reason to debunk the entire story, right? I think there are a lot of people out there, Glenn, I'm sure you have seen this, that they don't understand why after 4 games this would have come up, and it doesn't make sense when, the following week they fired Saleh, right? I think it actually makes perfect sense. Here's why. You play these, first 4 games. You are 2-2. You get embarrassed at home to a Denver Bronco team that you should have beaten. I don't care what the weather was. You should have won that game. You should have been 3-1, right? And either way you cut it, after 4 weeks of the season, the team was a mess. Got blown out by the 49ers. Barely were able to beat the Titans only because Will Levis handed you the game. Yeah, you look great on Thursday against the Patriots. Then you went back to stinking up the joint against the Broncos. Woody Johnson calls a meeting and is like, guys, what the heck's going on here? We spent all this money. We got Aaron Rodgers. I let you guys run it back. We're 4 games into the season, and I got to tell you, this doesn't look very different from when Zach Wilson was playing quarterback. Do we need to bench Rodgers? Is he old? Is he washed? Again, that doesn't make it right that he asked the question, but that is very much in line with the way things went down. So, okay, they have that meeting. Woody Johnson, way too early, makes the claim that they got to bench Rodgers. Everybody in that meeting, so Saleh, Hackett, Douglas, Christopher, Jaime, Ulbrich are all in this meeting. The coaching staff is able to talk him off the ledge, right? Are able to convince him, no, that's not a good idea. We got to play Rodgers. We got to see this through. So let's think about this. He's already red hot. He's already kind of thinking that this has been a bit of a mistake where they got themselves in. He then flies over to London, where we know how much he loves it over there. He loves being Ambassador Johnson. Loves it. He's already red hot. There were already rumblings during that week. Before we knew about this meeting, there were rumblings all week long that they could make a change if they lost this game because you know that Woody was going to be entertaining friends. He was going to be in front of people that he was with when he was with the ambassador, when he was the ambassador, right? And so you go over there. You're getting blown out for a large portion of that game. You make a comeback. Rodgers kind of orchestrates the comeback. You fall short. We're already red hot. All week long, there's reports of things could turn here if things go bad in Minnesota. Things go bad in Minnesota. And so instead of benching Rodgers, Woody goes, well, you know what? The head coach was the guy who wanted me to continue doing this. The head coach was the guy that wanted me to continue with Rodgers when we had a conversation to bench him. You know what? It's time to make a change. The timeline makes perfect sense. It absolutely is in line with everything we already knew before this story came out about that week. It all makes sense. It all lines up. Is it the right thing to do? No. But the timeline all falls into place because I remember Rich Eisen that week talking about how he feared that if the Jets lost that game to fall to 2-3, that a move could be made. There was already these reports. I'd have to go back and find a bunch of them, but I remember the noise of, man, you know what it was? It was Eric Mangini. It was Eric Mangini on one of the Fox shows that he was on. He talked about, he was like, yeah, you know
that
what?
Was the reason he gave.
He was like, you know what? He's over there in London. He's going to be in front of his buddies when he was the ambassador. If they don't win this game, I could see them making changes. We were already talking about that before we knew this meeting took place. So he was red hot. Mangini says that thing, right? Where we were already making noise about this. They lose. They were getting embarrassed through the first half of that game. And then Woody flies back and goes, you know what? No, you tried to convince me that Rodgers needed to stay as the quarterback. You're done. You're out of here. I need a spark. I need to try to turn things around. So it all makes sense. It all absolutely makes sense.
And Wild Wave, thanks so much for the contribution there. If you ruin my reputation, I'm spilling the beans. JD might not get another GM job again. If you're going to cripple him, you should have fired him. And I can't say I disagree. And I still, we're not going to get into this because we've had the discussion a million times. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because Douglas has been gone now for, 5-6 days, however long it's been. And still, every time I turn something on, and whether it was McAfee when they covered it, the Pat McAfee show, and they had the former Cowboys DB, I forget his name. They had him on set. Now listen, I understand, I'm not naive. I know that Joe Douglas is good friends with Todd McShay, but you've got Todd McShay putting out the little video he did. You've got the former Cowboys DB on McAfee. You've got Orlovsky going on ESPN. They're all saying, now I started saying this 2 years ago. I said this before the Achilles, before the season started. And I said, whose seat is hotter if things don't go well this season? And for 2 years, I've been saying, well, and this is my view, Chris, and disagree. I don't care, but I look at this Jets team, and I still don't believe the talent is the issue. You can say your record is what you say your record is what you say you are, or you are what your record says you are. I don't disagree. I'm not disagreeing they're 3-8. I'm saying the talent is better than that. And you got Orlovsky, listing the names of guys, and he left a few good names out. But Orlovsky's like, you got Breece Hall, you got Braylon Allen, you got Garrett Wilson, you got so like, how are you 3-8? McAfee, same exact thing. They're live on the air when Joe Douglas gets fired. They're like, oh, what's everybody's thoughts? And former Cowboys DBs, like, I don't get it. I look at these names, I look at these players, I look at the talent, like a lot of good players on this team, and then now again, McShay, granted, big Douglas guy, but he was like, if the Jets aren't going to win with this much talent, they're not going to win. Like, you're 3-8 with all these players. So that's why my take is, and the example I gave this example a few weeks ago, Chris, and it's sort of ironic because, it's Parcells is saying that everyone just loves to repeat. You are what your record says you are. Parcells was the guy who came to the Jets after a 1-15 season.
Sure.
And their offense went from, I believe, dead last, bottom 2 or 3 for sure. And in one season, they went up like 15 spots. And we'll just talk offense because the defense went from 4-3 to 3-4. So there were a lot of personnel changes. We'll leave that alone. Just on the offensive side of the ball, when Bill Parcells came to that team, they jumped 15 spots. Do you know how many starters they replaced on that unit? 1. They replaced the right tackle, and they went from bottom of the league to middle of the league in one season. So the talent was there. They just didn't have the coaching. And I think that's why Rex wants this job. It might be the one thing that makes this job appealing to other coaches because there is some structure in place. You can say, even if you want to leave AVT out of it because of the injury questions, you can easily say they have 3 of 5 very good offensive linemen. Well, depending on your thoughts on Fashanu, I think Fashanu's going to be a very good player. But between Fashanu, Simpson, Tippmann, that's 3 really good linemen. Like, the last couple GMs to take over came in and had nobody. Like, you came in and Brian Winters was duct taped together and he was your best lineman. So there is some structure there, but we'll move on from that.
Well, there's something you said there because you and I hope people understand because we kind of had a very heated show last week where the 3 of us were kind of going back and forth. I hope everybody understands it is all in good fun. The 3 of us have a ton of conversations off the air where we poke fun at each other, and we love this, and we there's no ill will between any of us when we have these conversations. We have a fundamental disagreement on where this team is right now. You still think there's talent. You still think there's a core worth investing in. I am a little different. And I'm so glad you put up James's comment. And James, I don't mean to take a shot at you, but here's my problem. They're a 3-8 organization, but not a 3-8 roster. Okay, So wait a minute, because we fired the head coach, right? And the head coach was supposed to be really good on the defensive side of the ball. The defensive coordinator was supposed to be really good on the defensive side of the ball. Why is the defense Swiss cheese this year? Why? They've had the coaching. Because if there's one, every time we talk about Robert Saleh, man, but what a great defensive mind. Man, this guy, he's got this defense playing out of their mind. Jeff Ulbrich, oh man, this guy's going to be a future head coach, but he's got this defense. He makes adjustments. He listens to his players. He's constant. You can't say on one hand that Robert Saleh, great defensive mind, Jeff Ulbrich, really good at the defense. They've been here this whole time. We've seen in years past this defense been really good. This year, same talent. Sauce Gardner's still here. DJ Reed's still here. Quinnen Williams still here. CJ Mosley's still here. If there's one group that's mostly the same, to use your comparison to the Parcells team, they didn't change a lot of the main pieces on that defense. You want to talk about the interior of the defensive line? Fine.
That's what I was going to say.
But hold on.
That's where the defense has fallen apart most.
But hold on. Sauce can't tackle anymore. What's that about? DJ Reed hasn't been good in coverage. So you can't tell me that you need to bring in a coach who maximizes their talent. You had that coach on the defensive side of the ball, and it's been a disaster this year. So, again, I'm not saying I don't like Sauce. I'm not saying I don't like DJ Reed. I'm not saying I don't like the talent on this team. But we've got to recontextualize this. This is not the team we thought it was. We have to relook at this. This is not a juggernaut talented team that we thought it was going into this year, going into last year. This is not a team that's just a quarterback away anymore. It's not. They are not that team.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think the problem is, and I say this all the time, I get to say this a lot because the Jets have a lot of very bad seasons. But I do feel it's really hard for me to evaluate players when you're out of the playoff hunt before Thanksgiving, before Halloween. Because it's like, again, I'm not saying this is right or, I'm not defending it. I kind of am in saying that these are human beings. Like, is the effort, the preparation, like, are you putting in as much work to win football games when you know that win will mean nothing versus if you'd started off the season 4-1 versus 2-3, your coach is fired. You're like, well, that's it. Season's over. And again, like I said, I'm not defending it. I try to remind myself, so, like, in a perfect world, every single dude would play every single snap the way Ray Lewis did. And I mean, in terms of effort, that doesn't happen in the real world, though. And you see it, and you hear veteran players who are now commentators say it. This is the time of year when guys start making business decisions. Is it worth getting hurt for a team in a game that doesn't matter the outcome? So again, I'm not saying it, but I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying that this is something that we do see. But in terms of the defense, I think the interior D-line, Javon Kinlaw's been a huge bust. I think he's been better. I think he has his moments. And I spoke to a good friend of mine who's a 49er fan after the acquisition. He said Kinlaw's going to have games where he sets the world on fire, and he's going to have games where he disappears. And he's had it, like, especially recently, he's had a couple of games where his get-off looks really impressive. He's getting in the backfield in a hurry, but it's just too little too late, so fans don't care. But Kinlaw's a huge bust. Getting rid of JFM, I said at the time, was dumb, but they did it. I think they expected Reddick to come into camp, and that was a fail on Joe Douglas. I'll put it on him, fine. But I'm not going to kill the guy. He took somewhat of a gamble. I think they looked at the Reddick situation and said, what's going on? Okay, he's upset about money. Okay, well, what's going to happen if he doesn't show up to camp? He's going to lose a lot of money. What happens if he starts missing real games? He's going to lose a lot of money. Okay, well, if this is about money, he's not going to do that. And he did that. And it was like, all right, we took a calculated risk and we lost. It wasn't, I think most people were like, oh, week one, he'll be there. He's not going to start losing $800,000 a week. He did, and he was willing to do it. But I think it was up front. It was the D line. You lost Al Woods, you lost Quentin Jefferson, you traded JFM, and you didn't backfill him enough. It was that's not on Woody, that's on Joe Douglas. But
I need to tie. I want to tie a ball on one thing real quick, and then we can move on to the next part of the story, because there are a lot of people saying that if you can't stop the run, you're going to get destroyed, right? The New York Jets this year, rushing defense, allow 130 yards per game on the ground. That's what they average. Their defense allows to give up 130 yards per game on the ground. Last year was 124. I'm not watching a different group, guys. I'm just not. It might be different players, but it's the same problem. They're not getting destroyed the way that they like. It's not a double increase from where it was last year. They're not going from a group that was only allowing 75 to 80 rushing yards a game to now a team that's allowing 150 and they're getting doubled up. They're not. It's the same group it was in 2023.
And I will say, Chris, in their defense, because I went back and looked at this after the Houston game. There was a 3-game stretch. Let me take a look. I think it was Pittsburgh, New England, Houston. I could be wrong. I looked at those. And then we saw what they did against the run against Indy. I get that all yards count, but there's sort of different ways to give up yards,
Right.
and I this is what I used to, and a lot of people say about Barry Sanders, for as great as Barry was, sometimes the improvisation was a little too much and there might have been 3 yards there, but he didn't want it. So he'd turn back and try to get 50, but he'd get caught. And now it's -2 instead of +3. And it's a net loss it's a 5-yard loss, basically. It's not like this defense is going out there and the opposing offenses are in the 3 games I looked at. It's not like the back was going 7 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards, 7. It was a lot of 2-2, 1-3, 2-2, 1, 18, 2-2, 1-3, 17. So like they were getting stops and chunks, but the occasional big play. So they weren't giving up long, sustained drives where they just had no answer for the run. And I just kind of felt like they're there. Like get 1 or 2 more stops a game, and you're keeping teams, at 70, 80 yards a game rushing. We finally saw it this week against Indy, where they apparently did a tackling clinic, and and you're facing that group with the threat that Richardson is on the ground with Jonathan Taylor. I thought this was going to be another 150+ yard rushing game for their opponent, and it was probably their best performance of the year against the run. But like you said, we can move on. We get it. They've got worse against the run. They've had some moments, but they haven't been consistent enough. They're not going to the playoffs. That's what matters. Let's do the Bryce Huff thing now. What are your thoughts there? Joe Douglas. Now, look, everybody said Joe Douglas was an idiot. He's a moron. How do you let him go? I was surprised that Douglas let him go just because he was a homegrown guy, and you normally do everything you can to keep those guys. But I basically, my thought was, if Huff wanted 70, 75% of the snap share, that wasn't going to happen. And that's probably what went wrong and why they couldn't agree. And I wasn't going to kill either side for it. The Jets have their philosophy. Huff had his desire to play more. Go your separate ways. But now this report says Joe Douglas was willing to pay him. Joe Douglas wanted him to come back. And I can't kill Woody for this. If Woody was like, hey, guys, that looks an awful lot to me like a full-time player salary, and this dude plays 60% of the time, I'm not doing that. So I can't kill Woody for it, but it is a move that Joe Douglas got killed for not making, and now it turns out, if the report's true, it wasn't his call not to make it.
Here's why I can kill Woody for it. You hired a football guy. Let the football guy make the football decisions. If you don't want the football guy making football decisions, then fire him. Don't let him make the decision. If he's going to come to you and say, this player helps us win, we need to pay him this amount of dollars, and you don't say yes. Now, again, you can ask questions. You're the owner. You should be involved in the process. But if you are not going to let the football people make football decisions, then you should just do what Jerry Jones does in Dallas. Be the GM too, buddy. Go ahead. Because if you're not going to hire the right guys and let them do their job, let them work. Now, was Joe Douglas the right guy? No. His record is incredibly reflective of what happened here. He did not deserve to get a new contract. He was going to get fired at the end of the year. So I'm not mad at the timing of the firing or anything like that. But you can't, if your general manager comes to you and wants to sign somebody that's on the team that he thinks is going to make the team better, as the owner, you should be like, okay, football guy that I hired to make this decision, you think this is the right decision to the team? Great. And then if it doesn't work, that's when you start to file that away of, is this really the right football guy for my team? And then when you start to have a bunch of those pile up, then you can start to be like, hey, what are we doing here? Right? Joe Douglas, Bryce Huff was a good player. Helped this team tremendously. And so if you're not going to let the football guy make the football decisions and run the team, what are we doing? It doesn't matter who you hire as your GM. It doesn't matter who you hire as your head coach. It doesn't matter who you have as your quarterback. You've got the owner of the team, and I'm sorry I'm jumping ahead. You got the owner of the team wanting a guy benched in the middle of a season that's already down the toilet. He wanted Tony Adams benched? Like, what are we doing, Glenn? Like, at what point do we get to a place of, I can't see the way through, can't see the way out here because Woody's still hanging over this team. Woody's always going to be involved. even if he goes to be the ambassador. And NJ Lauren is bringing up a point that I am petrified to find out about, because I am petrified to find out that Woody was fat-handed and he forced them to pick Zach. Because if that ever came out, and I have a feeling that if it was true, we would have seen it with this story, that it would have come out now. So I don't think it's true. But boy, can you imagine? Can you imagine if it comes out that Woody Johnson had his fingerprints all over Zach Wilson, and that they didn't really want to take him, that they wanted to go in a different direction, and he forced Zach on them? Now, I was a Zach's truther, so I don't get this out. I believed in Zach. I thought it was a good pick, so I have to take the L. But if they got forced Zach on them, guess what? All of this goes back to Woody, because the reason why we're in this mess is because of that decision. So whether it's Joe's fault or Woody's fault or Salah's fault, whoever's fault it is, everything that we're talking about right now is all because they picked the wrong guy at number 2. And I have to be the first person to put my hand up and say I was wrong too, because I thought Zach was the guy.
100%. Look, I loved Zach. I thought he was going to be a legit QB. Here's an educated guess. I'm not saying I know anything. I think Douglas wanted Zach. But I've been saying this for quite some time, and I've taken heat for it. Oh, you're just making excuses for Joe. You just don't want to say he did something wrong. I've been saying since it happened, because sometimes move, and now we're finding it out. Now we're seeing, like I said, when the Hassan Reddick thing was at its peak in terms of the tension and the anger with Jets fans, I said, you are never going to convince me that Joe Douglas is more concerned about Woody Johnson's money than he is winning football games. And if Hassan Reddick isn't getting some type of reworked contract, that's not coming from Joe. I guarantee you Joe was like, look, let's give him a few extra million and get him in camp and let's go. But it wasn't happening. And that appears to have been the case. But the same thing, I said it with the Zach situation, not the draft, but not getting a backup. I truly believe ownership,
right,
whoever it was in Woody's ear, was like, look, Woody, we just spent X amount of dollars in draft picks to acquire Aaron Rodgers, and we're on the hook for this much for Zach. Zach, as we know, was the nephew of a friend of Woody. I think if Joe wanted to get somebody in there to bump Zach down to 3 or ship him out of town, I don't think ownership was going to let him have it. And mainly for the money. I think they were going to say, look, we're not paying Zach 9 and Aaron 25 and all these draft picks and go spend another 10. We're not doing that.
And
so
this
Zach's
story,
guy, find someone for vet minimum. Aaron just vouched for his guy Boyle. Go get him.
And this story kind of backs you up, because they wanted to do the Huff extension, and they were told, at least according to the story, that the new money, any new money, that they were vetoed on. So that is right in line with what has been a long-standing theory of yours, that the reason why they didn't bring up a backup quarterback was because they didn't want to spend the money. And so, again, if you're going to hire football guys, let them make the decision. If you want to do everything, Jerry Jones makes it very clear. He's the owner, and he's also the general manager. It's very clear that all the decisions run through him. If you want, what Woody wants is, he wants a say, but also wants a scapegoat when things go wrong. That's what he wants. And that's really telling to me.
Yeah, Wild Wave says in the chat here, Josina Anderson said Woody didn't want to pay for another QB. I honestly don't remember that, but I do recall Zach Rosenblatt saying it, Wild Wave. Wild Wave, I don't know if you mean that's recent or a while ago, but that was a Zach Rosenblatt point. We actually had him on to discuss it because I've been saying it for so long. I'm like, oh, finally someone on the beat is saying this. And we had Zach Rosenblatt on, and he kind of felt that's what happened. They didn't want to pay again. So I'm sitting here and and look, I understand the frustration of a fan if you're not thinking of it that way. But to sit there and say, why isn't Douglas bringing in a quarterback? Why? And my thought is, exactly, why isn't it? It is so, it just flies in the face of common sense. You literally just went out and spent however many hours and weeks and months making this Aaron Rodgers deal happen because you've come to the conclusion that Zach Wilson isn't good enough to win you a ring. So you went and got Rodgers. And then you, knowing that Zach Wilson was one snap away, one 40-year-old quarterback snap away from being your guy again, and you didn't replace him with an $8 or $9 or $10 million Gardner Minshew or somebody like that. It's so nonsensical that I thought, knowing that, and you know, I mentioned this last night, Chris, I've said it before. I don't mention it a ton because there's nothing you can do about it, but it was years ago that somebody pointed Jaime Elhigh out to me at a practice and said, he's the guy that makes the money decisions. If they want to make a move, they run it through him. And knowing that was a money move, my thought was, I don't think this is Joe D's call. I think this is a situation where the Johnsons and Jaime are looking at the budget, looking at the payroll, looking at the position and how much is already invested and saying, you're not getting another guy. You need to go find someone for vet minimum. That's all you're getting. And that's what he did.
It's tough. It's tough because, there's other parts of the story too that just don't make, that I don't want to say don't make sense, but my eyebrow raises, right? Why does Woody Johnson have to go? If Joe Douglas was iced out the way the story makes him out to be, and I believe it, why is Johnson pushing Joe to trade for Devontae Adams? If you're Woody, just call up the Raiders and trade for Devontae Adams. Like, why are you trying to have it both ways? Why are you trying to have a GM and not have a GM? Right? If you want to make a move, you're the owner of the team, make the move. Don't fat hand the GM and say, oh, you know what you should really do? You should really trade for Devontae Adams. We really should do this. This really would make our team a lot better. If you wanted to do it, then do it.
I think unless I read it wrong, I read the Athletic report. I think they said by then Douglas wasn't doing anything. That was the point at which Woody took control. And I don't know if he had Phil Savage or whoever, somebody else made that deal happen. But Woody was the one. I think Joe Douglas wanted the deal, but I think Joe Douglas wanted it at a better price. And the Jets came in and supposedly outbid everyone by a lot because nobody else was willing to go with a potential second rounder for what may have been a 1-year rental.
Yeah, the story says that he lost power midway through last season. So that would be the 2023 season is where Joe started losing power. And then in February, then he had to fire Rex Hogan. That was in January. And then it seems so weird at the time, right? Like it felt so just like what, like
the
why?
Timing,
And so that happened in January. Then in February, Chad Alexander leaves.
Yep.
And then that's where it felt like Joe didn't have anything anymore. He didn't have any say. And then that's where there's the quotes of they're holding him hostage. Joe was checked out. That's February. But again, if you've taken all this from him, why are you pushing him to trade for Devontae Adams? So that there are two options. There are two possibilities. Either this timeline's all weird and it's not really true. That's bucket number one. Or bucket number two, Woody Johnson is, as an owner, just all over the place, and it's just a mess.
Well, and one thing that really it kind of, because again, as a Joe Douglas guy, when I hear this quote from Woody that this is the best team we've ever built, I'm like, oh, okay, well, Woody's on board. But that Athletic report, now this wasn't confirmed, but they said the feeling for some people in the building was that was Woody Johnson saying, this is the best team I've ever built. Because he was responsible for so many of the moves. He was, without the fans knowing, giving himself credit for the deals he had made for going after Mike Williams. And look, maybe Joe orchestrated the moves, but if Woody just goes into Joe's office and says, get Mike Williams in here, get Hassan Reddick in here, get Devontae Adams in here. So Joe, I think as I mentioned earlier, I work, at the pleasure of the owner. A lot of people went crazy about that comment. I didn't as much because there's a part of me that was like, well, everyone kind of does what their boss tells them. But at the same time, that's not a comment you generally hear an NFL GM make. This isn't a dude at McDonald's saying, I'm working the fries today because Steve told me to. No, this is like you're the head of an organization and they're asking you what moves you're making. You're like, I'm doing what the owner tells me.
All right, I'm going to use my own personal job role here to give an example of how good things are run and how bad things are run. I have the pleasure. It's the greatest job I've ever had in my life. I run a radio station. I run a sports radio station here in Phoenix. It is my job. I am in charge of the station. I have a boss who is the president of every single station that is in our building. There are 5 of them, okay? There's a bunch of music stations and the sports station. My boss hired me to run the sports station. I have autonomy to run the sports station in the vision that I see. If there are big picture conversations that involve spending money and doing a bunch of things, I have to run those by him. But on a day-to-day level, the inner workings of running the sports station and making it a really good sports station here in town, I get to do what I want. I have the ability to do that. If a owner hires a general manager, Let that general manager run the day-to-day operations of running a football team. If it's a big picture, trading for Aaron Rodgers or trying to get Aaron Rodgers, that's a we got to bring the owner in conversation. That's a we have to have a bigger picture conversation. Yep. Wanting to sign Mike Williams or Tyron Smith or a free agent, I don't think you have to run every single decision by the owner. And so, there's a lot to this story, okay? At the end of the day, here's my big takeaway. Maybe we can make this the overarching final thought here because we could do this all night. And I got to tell you, it's a Friday night. I'm not going to allow the Jets to take more of my bandwidth. My family is waiting for me to have a fantastic weekend. The Jets don't play. This is it. I'm dumping it all here on a Friday, and then I'm done. This story came out when? Tuesday?
I know where you're going with this.
I haven't heard a single thing from Woody Johnson.
Nothing.
Woody Johnson hasn't taken to any airwaves in New York, hasn't talked to a single reporter for any of the New York newspapers, hasn't talked to any major NFL reporters. You don't see Ian Rappaport refuting any of this. You don't see Adam Schefter refuting any of this. You don't see Tom Pelissero, Mike Garafolo, any of the big names in the NFL counteracting this story. Woody Johnson has gone silent on this. Isn't that the biggest indicator that in the main, most of that story is true? Isn't that really the signal that we need to know that we've gone 3+ days here and Woody Johnson hasn't said a peep? He hasn't attempted to refute this at all. There's your problem. There's your signal that most of what's in that story is probably true.
And keep in mind, like as soon as you started that, I knew where you were going because I had the same exact thought. And this is an owner who is about to start a head coach and GM search with this story out there about him and has said nothing. You can say all you want. He's the owner. He's bigger than all this. He doesn't care. Well, if he wants to get a desirable candidate in here, if he wants people to believe he's a good guy to work for, he needs to come out. A tweet, a one-sentence tweet, a cryptic one-sentence tweet where you just make it clear that, that sometimes, disgruntled employees, you never know what they'll make up. Anything like that would be like, all right, well, Woody's refuting this. Now, even if he does it now, it's like, okay, now are they crafting an answer? Are they covering their bases before they say something? Because, yeah, he said absolutely nothing with all this damning info out there. He's got a player in his locker room right now who's thinking, owner came for me. Like, I'm a UDFA, in my second year, finding my way. Owners, I'm the target. Tony Adams, like, not some dude who's making however many millions a year. He's coming after me. And now, look, the Tyron Smith thing, I do wonder about that. I wonder if they reached a breaking point and said, look, man, we're going to pull you. We're going to say you're hurt, but you're done here. But it's just a weird thing and a very good point, Chris, because like I said, by sort of day 2 after all this, I was like, wait a minute. Nothing from Woody yesterday, nothing from Woody today. And now here we are another couple days later, still nothing from Woody to defend himself. So I don't know if we left any major points out. Take a look at the list real quick. We talked about Huff. Now the Judy thing. He came out himself. What's that?
What the Judy thing is whatever to me. Yeah. I mean, to me that goes back to my previous point of let your football guy do football things. If he wanted to trade Lazard and a day 2 pick for Jerry Jeudy, I don't know if it would have. It would. The Jets would not be 8-3 instead of 3-8 if they had Jerry Jeudy. Let me just make that particularly clear. But that's just an example of whether or not it's true. Can you let the football guy do the football things, please?
Yeah. Judy appeared to claim he was the one that nixed that trade. I mean, it's possible that before the trade went through, Judy said, I don't want it. And Woody said, I don't want it. And without both sides knowing. But either way, like as I said, even if most of this is true, even if some of it's true, it's very damning. So Woody pushed for the Devontae trade. Tyron Smith and Mike Williams were Johnson driven. Johnson benched Tony Adams. That's the weirdest one. And Rodgers likely won't return, which, as we said at the top, having to learn a new offense for one season, I can't imagine there's a guy out there that would want this job. Any thoughts on potential GMs or coaches, Chris, before we wrap this up?
I think they need to make sure, Because I think there are a lot of people that are just defeatist that nobody's going to want this job. And while largely I agree that I think it's going to be tough to get high quality candidates, at the end of the day, they are going to get somebody that's going to want to do this.
Yeah, somebody
they're going
will
to get,
want, as
they're
I
going to,
said, McCagnon wanted it. You'll get an Idzik type if you're dying for it. But
there's going to be somebody who thinks they are the person that has the secret sauce to fix the New York Jets. All that I ask is they uncover every rock. They turn over every stone in this process. You want to talk to Rex Ryan? Fine. You want to try to call Bill Belichick? Fine. You want to talk to Dorsey? Fine. You want to talk to people in the Lions personnel department? Fine. You go old school, new school, retread, people inside the building, people outside of the building. You do as extensive as a search as possible, because you told me reason why you fired Joe Douglas is because you wanted to get a jump start on things. So if you want to get a jump start on things, then this better be the most expansive GM search that you have ever been able to accomplish, because you've got all this time. You jump started it by about 6-7 weeks to be able to do this. So make sure it is an extensive process. And you know what? If there's a bunch of names in there that I don't like, but they're old school guys or people in other organizations that are looking for second chances, whatever the case may be, just cover the entire spectrum of people that are available to you for this job. That is all I ask for. Don't make me feel like you just already knew you were hiring this person and Rex Ryan and you were just ready to go on November 22nd. Because if I get the stench that you didn't do what you were supposed to do and do an expansive search, I'm going to be pretty pissed off.
yeah, that would be that would not be ideal if they don't take advantage of the time they have. But I mean, that's the story. Is they're going to start early, and that was one of my first thoughts. Well, at least, and my first thought was at least Joe's gone, because he clearly serves no purpose there. And that was before I read the story about when he was actually relieved of his duties, or where power was taken from him. Yeah, it's a mess. But what else is new? The Jets, they're not allowed to be good, and they're not even allowed to be functional. It's an absolute disaster. But that'll wrap this one up, folks. There you have the full-on athletic allegations. I think most of it's true. I think most of it's, or some of it, is fairly obvious. Wildwave, good point. And I don't know if you're joking, Wildwave, but I don't know that I'd rule out Phil Savage, and I don't know that I wouldn't like Phil Savage. He's done it before, and I get that you guys have failed, but the idea is they learn, right? And Phil Savage ran the Senior Bowl for a while, extensive scouting background, GM history, so I wouldn't mind that.
Okay. I can't help myself. I said that was going to be the last thing, but Mike Saunders is just bringing me right. He's just bringing me right into the abyss here. How is Rex the best head coach ever? And how was the biggest problem was his general manager? After the 2 AFC championship years, 8-8, 6-10, 8-8, 4-12. Didn't have a winning record. Went to Buffalo, 8-8, 7-8. They threw him out the door. He was a coach for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seasons. 2 of them were winning records. His first 2. He then went 6 straight years without a winning record. The reverse Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin just wakes up, has a winning record in the NFL. Rex Ryan, the reverse. Didn't have a winning record for 6 straight seasons. So let's not pretend that the Rex era didn't overstay its welcome very, very quickly. Very quickly.
I think, and Mike is probably talking about what I referenced earlier, more postseason wins than any coach in team history, even if it was in a short span.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just like to play in the postseason again.
And again, and I'd have to look at those. I know he failed in Buffalo. I think in Buffalo, like if I'm bringing Rex in, I'm not letting him near personnel. Their first draft pick, I talked about this yesterday, Reggie Ragland, right, the linebacker out of Alabama, and it was like that got laughed at. I remember Jets fans were like, "This dude still thinks it's the 1980s." Like, you just drafted a huge linebacker who can't cover, and that you don't know, they're obsolete. And Rex used his first rounder with that. But yeah, look, I'll always speak up for Rex in terms of you brought on John Idzik and all your talent went out the door. You still got to have the talent. But again, I don't want anyone to mistake this for me saying Rex should come back. What's sad, Chris? You mentioned Rex's records, and I looked at them the other day. We talk about the 14-year playoff drought. Now, there is the one outlier, the Todd Bowles year, where they almost made the playoffs when they lost the final game of the season to Rex Ryan, funny enough. Since Rex Ryan, forget about playoff appearances. Todd Bowles is the only Jets coach to win 8 games in a season. Since Rex did it twice. We're not even talking. Forget
I need a drink.
Playoffs.
I need a
forget
drink.
about that. Like they can't win 8 games, and they haven't. Again, they did once for Bowles. Other than that, no seasons with 8 wins since Rex.
I'll tell you. At first, when people suggested Brian Flores, I thought it was a terrible idea. I've thought about it a lot more. He's from New York, grew up here, was born in Brooklyn. He would bring a culture. We know how it went with Tua. That's obviously a concern. But you would hope that he learned from that, right? And that he would be better the second go around. He's had to go be a coordinator in other places, so it's not like he's jumping right back into being a coach. Yep, and he's done. He did good in Pittsburgh. He did well in Pittsburgh. I should use correct grammar. Well in Pittsburgh. He's doing well in Minnesota. I wouldn't hate that. You have to get the OC right, though.
And
you have to.
You
have to get the OC right if you're going to go that way, though.
Yeah, I said it. I said what you just said. A lot of people said it. You can't bring him in for a young QB. But, man, you hope he learned a lesson.
Yeah.
And because, I think he would be. I mean, Aaron Glenn is still my first choice if you're going to bring a defensive guy.
True.
Don't want a defensive guy, but if it is, give me Aaron Glenn. Flores would probably be second behind him. But that will really wrap it up. Yeah. We are actually done. No more thoughts to share. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for jumping in the chat. Sorry we didn't jump into the chat as much as we usually do, but a lot to cover tonight on the Woody Johnson disaster as reported by The Athletic. We will catch you next week, Jets fans. Bye week, so Jets can't ruin your weekend. Have a good one, Jets fans.